Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. That appears to be, I think, a vehicle outside our chambers. Welcome to the joint city council meeting along with the Housing Authority for September 14th, 2021, being called to order at 2:04 p.m. To help slow the transmission of COVID-19 and protect the health and safety of the community, city council as well as board and commission meetings will continue to be closed to the public for in-person attendance. The public is encouraged to watch and participate from the safety of their homes or to practice social distancing. The meetings are broadcast live on Glendale TV, viewable on Spectrum Cable, Channel 6, and AT&T Uverse, Channel 99. Meetings are also streamed live in high definition on the city's webpage, glendaleca.gov/live, on youtube.com/myglendale, and on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire devices using a free app called ScreenWeave and choosing Glendale TV from the menu. And if none of that made sense to you, find someone under the age of 25 to explain what each of those things are. For public comments and questions during the meeting, call 818-937-8100. Public comments on a specific agenda item will be taken when that agenda item is discussed. Thank you. And with that, let's first have the roll call for council.
Councilmember Agajanian.
Present.
Brotman.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
And Mayor Pro Tem Kasakian.
Here.
And Mayor Devine.
Let's now have the roll call for the Housing Authority.
Authority Member Agajanian.
Here.
Agajanian.
Present.
Brotman.
Here.
Devine. Najarian.
Here.
Parazian.
Here.
Chair Kasakian.
Here. With that, let's have your report.
The agenda for the Tuesday, September 14, 2021 joint public meeting of the City Council and Housing Authority was posted on September 7, 2021 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
The first item is the approval of minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of the joint City Council Housing Authority meeting from August 17?
Yeah, I'll
Like
approve.
to move the items.
Oh, okay. I'll second it in that case.
Thank you. Moved by Member Agajanian, seconded by Member Brotman. The hearing, if there are no other objections or corrections, we'll adopt, the minutes will stand adopted as submitted. So with that, let's move on to the meat of the order, number 2.
Number 2 would be community development regarding Glendale workforce housing update, Cal CHA and CSCDA acquisition approval authority. A would be City Council resolution to vest authority to participate in the future workforce housing acquisitions and grant approval of agreements with the City Council. B, Housing Authority resolution to vest authority to participate in future workforce housing acquisitions and grant approval of agreements with the Housing Authority.
Mr. Galanian?
Yes. Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Kasakian and Housing Chair Kasakian, members of City Council, and members of the Housing Authority. This report presented to you this afternoon is intended to provide an update on 2 statewide JPAs, housing JPAs, and as well as request authority to participate in future workforce housing acquisitions and approval of the agreements with the City Council that currently resides with the City Manager and Executive Director of Housing. With that, I'll turn it over to Mike Fortney, our Principal Housing Project Manager, to provide the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Galanian. Good afternoon, City Council members, Mayor Kasakian, and Mike Fortney, Principal Housing Project Manager for the city.
I think it might be your mic.
Your mic is off. Can you turn it off?
Everything's on. Again, thank you. My name is Mike Fortney, Principal Housing Project Manager. Good afternoon to the City Council and Housing Authority members. Presenting the Glendale Workforce Housing. We, as a city, joined 2 different JPAs, Cal CHA, as well as CSCDA, CIA, a lot of acronyms there. Cal CHA is a recently created authority back in 2019. Glendale joined in February 2020. We joined CSCDA, CIA, which is also a new entity. CSCDA has been around a long time. The three initials afterwards, that's a fairly recent creation. We joined them in 2020, and very quickly after we joined them, they identified sites in Glendale that they wanted to work on. They have quite a few additional members throughout the state. This, I tried to get the most up-to-date number. I believe it's 15 right now, members of the CSCDA, CIA, and that number is growing. I think there's something like 5 cities that are in the works of becoming additional members there. Cal CHA has over 30 additional members already. So what the Workforce Housing Program does, again, these are both joint powers authorities. They issue tax-exempt bonds to acquire developments on the open market. They convert these market rate rental projects into rental housing for low and moderate income households. So they typically target between 80 and 120% of area median income. They target Class A buildings valued at generally $100 million or greater. So they're looking at big assets when they do these. And then the affordability period, the time that those units are tied to 80 to 100 to 120% AMI, those terms are tied to the bonds, and the bonds are almost always 30 years. The 4 acquisitions in Glendale are all 30-year bonds. Another thing about their program, the rent cannot be increased by more than 4% annual, so that's less than what a market rate project could do.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Of course.
Who decided that 4% annually rent increase capped at 4%? Who decided that?
The Joint Powers Authority, both of them decided on that 4% cap.
Okay.
And that's something that gets baked in, I should say, into the bond financing and all the underlying assumptions in terms of the financial feasibility, long-term of the project. So all that is baked into the pro forma and the cash flow projections and all of that there won't be an increase of 4% or more.
Thank you.
So what happens after year 15, the city or housing authority could acquire the asset by exercising, it's either a purchase option agreement or a public benefit agreement. They're essentially the same thing, just one JPA calls it one and one JPA calls it the other. They're essentially the same document. We could exercise after 15 years after the acquisition of the property, we could exercise our right to obtain that asset. The purchase price of that asset would be equal to the outstanding debt remaining on the project. So if they bought the project for $100 million and they paid down, $30 million, and there's still $70 million of debt 15 years into the project, we could acquire the asset for that $70 million.
Excuse me again. What would be the benefit at that time? I can't imagine why we would like to buy it after 15 years, unless you come up with some other ideas.
Unless something radically changed in the next 15 years, I don't think it makes sense for us to acquire the site after 15 years.
Okay.
If things radically changed and affordable housing was no longer the crisis that it is, maybe then we would. But that's probably not likely. Interestingly here, on a market rate project, you've got your reserves you have to fund, your capital replacement reserves, your operating reserves. These projects do the same thing. In fact, I've never seen a project with the kind of capital replacement reserves and operating reserves that these buildings have. It's incredible. They fund their reserves way more than I've ever seen done before. But then typically on a market rate project, the rest is profit. Here, there's no profit. Any excess cash flow beyond what the reserves are doing or what you're paying down your debt, all of it goes towards paying additional debt. All of the cash flow for the project. So there's no profit being taken from these projects.
Mayor Pro Tem, if I just interrupt for a second, because I think we jumped at a really important part, and it goes to what you were talking about. At year 15, we can exercise an option for the amount of debt on the project. At year 30, when that debt is extinguished by the bond, then the city or housing authority acquires the property virtually at no cost. We retain the asset. So that's a key piece. After 30 years, there's no cost.
And actually, that was the next bullet.
May I ask question?
Yes. Member
Yeah,
Brown.
just on that, so you were talking about how any additional cash flow goes into the debt repayment. So if the debt is repaid before 30 years, or is there any possibility that it would take longer than 30 years to repay the debt?
No, the bonds have to be paid in
Have to
30
be
years.
paid, but it could, if the cash flow is very good, it could end up, they could get paid off early, is that right?
Yes, in fact, there's a better than 50-50 chance that it'll be paid off before 30 years.
So it could be maybe a year early, or
3 years
early, or three, okay. And, but then at that point, we have that right to acquire, basically, that property would transfer to us at no cost, is that right?
Yes, that's
Okay.
exactly right. Mhm.
Got it.
So if everything goes according to plan, the bonds will be paid off in 30 years. There'll be no debt on the property. We could take it for, we won't say $0. There'll be some transactional cost, but it'll be ours.
Yeah.
But in a more favorable outcome, it could be achieved in, say,
And
27 or 28
just to
years.
follow up with one other question related to that. So in the event that, oh, okay, sorry, can you hear me? In the event that, let's say, things are not going very well, for instance, I'm thinking we've got that 4% cap on rent increases. Let's say inflation starts running at 10% a year, right? And we're not able to raise rates, but all our costs are going up. What would happen if at the end of the 30 years, we just didn't have the cash flow? I guess we'd be defaulting on the bonds, right? I mean, how would that work out?
Well, so we're not responsible for the bonds at all. The JPA issues those. They're fully responsible for paying those bonds. So we're not financially responsible for those bonds. But the scenario you're suggesting is, if for some reason the operating costs exceed the projected revenue and the project itself gets into trouble, then I think the JPA would have to look at the investors and look at potentially reinvesting or reissuing bonds, doing something to right that project. But it wouldn't be the city's responsibility.
Wouldn't be our responsibility, but could it jeopardize our ability to, acquire that asset at the end of the 30 years?
If the project, that's just not a scenario that I'd really run through. That's something I would need to kind of go back with attorneys and maybe even, and the JPAs, and just, okay.
Okay,
under
it's
this
kind of
scenario.
obscure, but I'm just thinking, because that 4% cap is great, right? If we've got inflation running around that level or below. But
Right.
it's just something I'm thinking about as we talk about, is inflation coming back and everything like that. I'm just curious about how
I
that would
understand
work.
exactly what you're saying.
Typically, upon issuance, there will be some coverage greater than 100%. So it might be 125%, 130%. That's what we experience with our redevelopment bonds. To kind of account for that, certainly if you had inflation that nobody expected, my guess is that the JPA would be able to work out some kind of financing with the investment group, because nobody's going to want to own, the investor is not going to want to own the housing. They're going to want to be repaid on their bond.
Yeah, the only thing additionally I would say to that, I mentioned it before, the operating reserves and the capital replacement reserves, that's something, you typically see on all projects, or 100% affordable projects have those too. But these are funded extremely well. I mean, it's just incredible. So it would take many, many, many years of really bad numbers in order for one of these projects, in my opinion, to go south. That's how well reserved. I mean, to the tune of almost, I would say, 8 times the amount of capital replacement reserves we put into our projects is what they're putting into these. I mean, it's a huge number.
Okay.
Logistically, because of how we're set up, I can't, and we have some of our members joining us remotely. I can't see if any of my colleagues that are not here in the chambers have questions. So let me take a pause, and since we had some questions here from the dais, see if any of the folks who are over the web have any questions. Member Najarian, Ajinian.
I'm good up to this
Raza.
point, thank you.
Okay. If there are no other questions, let's proceed. And let's hold off any other questions to the conclusion of the report. It's just a few more slides. A few of them are pictures and some graphs, so I'm sure we'll be able to get through it quickly. Mr. Fortney.
Okay, so next on your screen, this is Cal CHA's 2 acquisitions. You have Brio Apartments at 524 West Colorado Street, and then you also have Next on Lex. Let's see. And then CSCDA's 2 projects. You have Altana at 540 North Central and The Link at 3903 San Fernando Road. I thought I had the printouts here. I wanted to stop, I wanted to go back real quick here on this one. On Cal CHA, if everyone recalls, this one that we did a little bit differently, where they were willing to reserve some units at 50% AMI and some units at 80% AMI. So in Brio and Next on Lex, each has 70 units at those lower AMI levels. An application period was open July 26th through August 16th. And I just wanted to give you an update on that, on how that lottery is going. The developer received 6,423 applications for those 140 units. Of those, roughly 1,100 were folks that live and work in Glendale. We had roughly 900 people living in Glendale and roughly 400 people working in Glendale. But in total, 1,100 that both live and work in Glendale. Those aren't exact numbers because what we're doing right now in this very week, the city is doing a quality assurance check on the developer of the lottery process. And so their numbers, they come up with a set of numbers. We come up with our own set of numbers because maybe an address isn't really in Glendale, it's close. We go back and forth, we check everything. And then when we have final numbers, we'll give you those final numbers. Once we have those numbers, once the appeal period's over, right, because people can appeal, they can say, oh, no, I do live in Glendale, you have it wrong, we have it right, here's the evidence. As an example. Once that appeal period's on, once we've agreed to the numbers, then we can set a lottery date. Okay, so that date has not yet been set, but we will, at a staff update, we'll give you that date. Thank you. When the lottery is done. And again, developer is taking the lead on this. We're providing oversight to make sure that it's done properly, okay? So that's the status of the lottery for Brio and Next on Lex. And then Altana and The Link, they are your standard workforce housing projects, 80, 100, 120% AMI. We didn't get excess units in those at a lower AMI. And then just wanted to show you on the map where these projects are. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. Now, Altana and Next on Lex are very close to one another. Brio, on the other hand, is quite a bit of ways away, and then Link you have clear down in South Glendale. So you do have two projects that are fairly close together. The other two are quite a far apart. And then rents, market, and affordable. Just to give you an idea of rents here. So this number might be a little bit dated by about a month or two. It shouldn't be too off. Studio market rate rent, $2,350 all the way up to $3,900 for a 3-bedroom. If you notice, that's really close to about 100% AMI, especially on the studio. The 100s and the 120s you'll see grow. In fact, the 120s, if you could take the extreme, the 120 3-bedroom, 3,941, that's that far right number. That's just barely above market rate. So in this case, even though the moderate workforce program can go up to 120% area median income, in some cases, in some units, depending on the unit size, depending on the household size, the market might not even be at 120%. So nobody's going to pay more than market, right? So nobody's paying 120% if 120% AMI rent is higher than the market rent. So right now, that's the case in some of these units, where the program could go up to 120 on paper, but the market won't bear it, so people won't pay it, so they won't be charged it. That's, and Glendale is different than Pasadena, than Burbank, than San Francisco, where the AMIs and the market rents, the delta between those is different in every single jurisdiction. So some, there are jurisdictions in the state where this program doesn't even work. It doesn't even make any sense, one way or the other, whether it be the AMIs are so incredibly low or so incredibly high, and the delta between them and the market just doesn't make sense. But these are the numbers for Glendale. This is Los Angeles County area median income versus the market rate rents here.
Member Agajanian has a question.
How we come up with the market rent? Is it based on newer buildings or entire rental units in Glendale? How we calculate that market rate?
Those are based on market studies. So all 4 of these projects, there's about 600, maybe 700 pages that go into what's called a memorandum of offering, what I used to call in the redevelopment days, preliminary official statement. This is all the due diligence that goes into whether or not, they're going to issue bonds, whether people are going to invest in these. One of the things that they do is a market study. So each of these projects has done a market study. So that's where these market rate rents come from. Also, the management company for 3 of these 4, Greystar, they've been managing market rate properties in Glendale. In fact, they were managing at least a couple of these ones. So they know very well what the market rate rent for these Class A buildings are. So, but that, to answer the question directly, it comes from market studies.
Okay.
And then the flip side, or the consequence of the workforce housing, is we do see a net loss in property tax as a result of the acquisitions of these projects. So we broke this down between Cal CHA and CSCDA, CIA. 699 units under Cal CHA, that's the units in Brio and Next on Lex. 650 units at Altana and the Link. A total of 1,349 units that have been acquired. What that translates to us is a loss in annual property tax of $751,311. In the first year, that grows by 2% as property tax grows by 2%. So the aggregate property tax loss for us through 15 years is about $13 million, and it's about $30.5 million over the course of 30 years. But on the other hand, the projected value of the asset at year 15, when we could first exercise our public benefit agreement or purchase option agreement, is just under $360 million. And if we were to sit back and wait 30 years, if in fact it took 30 years for the bonds to pay off, we would be able to take control of an asset worth, or 4 assets worth $1.2 billion. So we lose money in the short term, that's $751,000 plus 2%. But in the long term, the city would gain $1.2 billion potentially in assets. So the action before you today is simply to take control of whether you want to enter into a public benefit agreement or purchase option agreement, should another one come along. Up until this point, it was the city manager or the executive director of the housing authority that had the authority to execute these purchase option agreements or public benefit agreements. So staff is recommending now, with 4 projects already acquired, with 1,349 units already in the workforce housing program, our recommendation is to let city council now make that decision moving forward. Do you want to execute? Is the next project that they identify, is it where you want it to be? Is it as big or as small as you want it to be? Any number of criteria that you would have, you could discuss and then make the decision yourselves versus the executive director and the city manager execute those agreements. And with that, I conclude, but I'm happy to try to answer any questions I can.
Thank you. Anyone do any of my colleagues have questions for staff?
I have a question, Mr. Kasakian.
Yes, Member President.
The chamber's voice is solo for me. Maybe I misheard Mr. Bradman's question about 4%. Michael, that the 4%, it won't go any higher in those 15 or 30 years? That will stay just 4%, or possibly it will go higher?
If I understood the question correctly, you were asking if that 4% is an absolute cap, and that is absolutely the cap. The rents on any of these units cannot increase by more than 4% annually. I hope that was your question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, Member Ajinian.
Could you correct us? What is the annual ABA increase, the rate increase? What is it?
What is the annual what?
4%. What is it?
Can you repeat that, Member Ajinian, please?
Can somebody tell me what is the annual ABA 1482 adopted state rent cap? What is
The rent cap, what is?
AB
the rent cap?
1482.
Oh, it's 5% plus CPI. Correct? Yeah, so yes, a typical project could increase rents by 5% plus CPI. So you could be looking at an 8% increase potentially annually.
Okay, so it's 8%. Okay. And we've gone by 4, it's like half of it. Okay, that's fine.
Understood.
Thank you.
I have a comment, not question.
Sure. Member Agajanian.
I have some questions, but
I mean, in the report, somehow there was this worry that whether we want to continue to accept such a buildings. I mean, I'm baffled. We definitely, this is my opinion, I don't know how my colleagues are feeling about this. I definitely want to see that workforce housing program to provide more housing or buy more buildings in Glendale to alleviate the pain and suffering that people are going through, but by renting places. And although we are one of the best cities, we capped it to 7%. But I would like to see we buy more buildings and offer to those with more reasonable rents to them. I mean, to worry that we're going to lose $751,000 of tax per year, and at the end, after 30 years, we were going to lose $30 million in taxes. This city will not get $30 million in taxes, but in return, we are getting an investment or money is this city will be richer by $1.2 billion. This is like when we go and buy a house, and most likely when you buy it new, the same house, the rent is cheaper than when you buy the payment. Your payment is higher than what you buy if you have no down payment. But in long run, rent's gonna go high, but you have your own house, you pay the same amount and you become richer. At the end of 30 years, you pay your loan to the bank, you own the house. So this is the same way. It's bad for us, but future council members, I will be very close to that 3903 San Fernando Road, where I would be after 30 years, but at least the people will benefit. Those who will reside in Glendale will benefit. They're gonna have 4 affordable, basically, housing units. So if there is more offering by workforce housing, I would like to see that we accept it. Of course, I think will be better if they notify us ahead of time, and will be better if they go south of Glendale, which is cheaper, rather than buying these luxury buildings. I would like to see that to be considered. Buying a building which is more to average people's income, rather than getting involved with luxury buildings and pay lots of money for it. So in consequence of that, when you buy more expensive building, the rent will be higher anyway. To pay off the building cost, the rent will be higher. So that's what I would like to see.
Thank you. Member Brotman?
Actually, I'll start with a comment to follow up on what Councilmember Agajanian said. I totally agree. I think this is an unbelievable financial deal for the city. I just ran a quick calculation on Excel. I'm trying to remember from my days doing finance. And what I got was this is like an investment with a 21% rate of return. How many investments? And it's a safe one too, where we're taking virtually no risk. And we're getting a 21% rate of return. If there's any bond out there that gives me a 21% rate of return, I'd be knocking down the doors to get to it.
And we don't offer any money.
We don't
not
offer
even
any
a dollar.
money. We give up, we're giving up this, tax every year, and then at the end, so it's a scream deal. I mean, this is, I'm still like scratching my head how this works, but it's really, really good. And at the same time, it's not just a financial deal for Glendale, but it's providing, housing that's affordable and also rent stabilized in this way. So I think it's tremendous. As far as, having these deals come to council, I'm okay with that. My only worry is that I don't want to miss any opportunities because of delays in getting a council decision. So please, assure me that that's not going to happen, that if something comes up and if a quick decision is needed, we should have some mechanism, and I don't know what it is, but we should have some mechanism for being able to pull the trigger. That's my one worry.
If I may, our thinking when we first joined these JPAs was we wanted the speed to execute these and not slow it down. Our experience has been, there's so much due diligence that goes into these things that we can bring it to you, get an approval or not, but bring it to you for your consideration much faster than they can complete all their due diligence and actually issue the bonds. So no, I don't believe there's any reason why we can't come to council and have this discussion on any specific project and meet their timeline. Their timeline has been about 60 days at the very quickest, from the time they identify site to the time they issue bonds. Typically, it's more like 90. We can easily meet that and fall within that.
Okay, but if for any reason there's a situation that doesn't fit that and we have to make a quick decision, I don't know, Mr. Galanian, if you can, assure us that there's some mechanism that we could have an emergency meeting or, or something, somehow or another, not lose these opportunities. That's basically it.
Mayor Pro Tem Kasakian, Councilmember Brotman, absolutely, like Mr. Fortney mentioned, at the onset of the news that we hear of either of these JPAs looking at any of the properties in Glendale with the potential of acquisition, we won't wait for them to go through the due diligence before we bring it to council. So as soon as we hear of any of these interests, we come to council, get your preliminary direction and approval, and then move forward, and we won't wait till the agreement is ready to be entered into. So apparently there's like a 60-day period, 60 to 90-day period.
It typically takes that long, yes.
So it's plenty of time that we can, from the onset of their negotiations with any of the properties, as soon as we find out, we'll bring an informational item to council so that you know, and then you can give us direction to let them know to proceed with their due diligence before they go too far into the program.
Right, okay. And just my question is really not so much for me, but for the public. If you, at some point, if you could just explain how the rents are adjusted year by year, because it's linked to the AMI, but there's a bit of a lag. We know that there's this 4% maximum, but also they could go down too if AMIs are dropping. So could you just explain to people how that works?
Right, so the area median income, it is calculated, done at the state level. We get those AMIs every year. You can go online, you can Google and get LA County area median income. It's that easy to find them. So the rents are based on 35% of 80, 100, or 120%, depending on the unit and its level. So that 35% of that 80% AMI, that's the high end rent. And so you can look at that, and you can look at your own income and guesstimate if you fall within 80, 100, or 120%, and then you would see what those rents are. But the rents are published, and then it's simply a matter of how much rents go up, whether it is the 4% or if it's less than that. You are right, it could actually go down. I can't recall in the last 14 years if AMI has actually dipped down. It may have, but I know it held steady, and rents were not increased for a number of years, maybe a decade or so ago. That could happen again, absolutely. So but it's just math. It's just how much increase that AMI does go up, and that rent calculates exactly like that. But the current rents are, we published them here. Those are known rents.
Are there any other comments? Councilmember Najarian?
Yes, I have some comments. So the deals for these buildings are already done. So there's really no sense going back, rehashing what was done and all that. But I like to think, as being a member of the city council and the housing authority, that I have some control over these issues that involve land use and affordable housing. And I feel that in this case, I did not have any say in it, aside from the very general and vague direction we gave to staff a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, to enter into this program. I still have a problem with the state coming in for whatever benevolent cause or reason and swooping into our city and making significant decisions as to what sort of land use we're going to use. Is there a decrease? Will these buildings being turned into affordable cause a decrease in adjoining properties? I don't know. But one could argue it does. Would we, as a city council, have agreed to permit the construction of the Altana or the Next on Lex if we knew it was going to be workforce housing? I was against those properties anyway, but I would imagine that the other members of council would not have been so enthused about it to permit those large developments in the city if they knew it was going to be in that downtown area, if they knew it was going to be workforce housing. I mean, that's speculation, but I think that's a significant change of the development entitlements that we gave those folks when we permitted those large buildings, and we caught quite a bit of hell for that. One of the excuses we gave is, well, it's going to upgrade the city. It's going to bring in a high level of tenants, a high level of residents with of the new era of industries, film, technology, et cetera. And that's not what we're having here. These are blue collar folks that are going to be in there, and God bless them. I'm not sure they're going to have the same sort of disposable income that we were expecting the former tenants and residents to have. I just don't like the state coming in and telling us what to do and how to do it, whether it's SB 9 and SB 10, and this is another example. So I would hope that but that's water under the bridge for these projects. I would hope that going forward, we at least can have a report and a hearing on these. There are issues that we as a council need to weigh in on, and not just rubber stamp the fact that we're getting additional affordable housing, workforce housing, et cetera. We need to make considerations for this. It's not just bringing in housing. It's neighborhood development, it's transportation, it's mobility, it's economic development. A lot of things go into making a decision on permitting a project to come in or to change the type of use and type of tenant makeup. So I would hope that we would know and have a chance to weigh in on the next round that comes through, if there is more. And a part of what we were doing, in permitting these big developments, the Brio, the Next on Lex, was to upgrade our at-market housing stock, which is still in very short supply. And now we've wiped those 1,300 units of at-market housing off the books. And don't tell me that doesn't have an effect on the city. Do not tell me that, because I don't think you can with a straight face. We do try to attract residents from all over, new residents or existing residents, to a certain type of building and location that has a certain panache. And these were our jewels. I mean, let's not joke about it. The Altana, in their presentation, this is the finest luxury housing. The Next on Lex, a paseo through it with coffee shops and all this. The Brio, also weight rooms and gyms and amenities. We were trying to attract a certain type of tenant to the city of Glendale. Now we've wiped that out. Are we getting something good in return? Yes, we are. Clearly, let's not say that it's a bad thing that we're getting workforce housing, but we're shortchanging that other concept that we had in terms of bringing up Glendale's, let's call it standard of living or level of residence. Anyway, just let us know ahead of time, and so we can weigh in on it and have these discussions. This would be a very legitimate discussion to have at the next time we're presented with a building. And these are the things I would think about when I'm presented with another opportunity with this program. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Do any of our Housing Authority members have comments? Okay. Mr. Agenian said no. Ms. Prazian sounds like is also a no, so I'll just make a few comments. First things first, I want to thank you for the report, Mr. Fortney, and for that presentation and bringing this to the public forum for the public to understand what is happening. There's a lot of rumors out there about some of these buildings that were, as Mr. Najarian indicated, or alluded to, built and approved with a certain expectation, and now the nature of what those buildings will be, the individuals that they will house has changed. So we're putting some rumors to rest, answering questions, but in municipal government, we have a tendency to wrap ourselves in a maze of acronyms. So I want to have the public who's watching this, whoever is interested in it, to understand better what is happening. So there are two entities, the CalCHA and the CSCDA-CIA. Can you explain what those entities are, what those acronyms stand for?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the report to see, I'm hoping I spelled those out at one point. CalCHA, as I recall, that's California Community Housing Authority. And I'm trying to remember the full acronym.
It's on the first page.
Oh, it is.
First page of report.
Oh, the PowerPoint. Oh, great, good. Yes, the California Community Housing Authority, I was good on that one. California Statewide Communities Development Authority, that was a long-standing organization. The CIA, the Community Improvement Authority, that's the Joint Powers Authority that was just recently.
And so you mentioned a number of cities that are part of it. So what does membership entail? How does an entity become a member of it, and what does membership require?
So membership, and we are additional members of both. It simply took the action of the city council. In our case, we did both city council and housing authority. It was a simple agreement to become an additional member. There's no dues of any sort that we paid to the authority. And to my knowledge, there's no additional benefit other than
So simply saying or having the willingness to be a participant is enough, and then you become a member of it to join.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Great. And there's been references to Class A apartment complexes. What constitutes Class A? Is it the size, or is it the price of rent? Is it, you mentioned 100 or more units. Is there a specific category that Class A is defined by?
I think it falls not necessarily the size, although I think that's part of it. It's the quality of the project, the overall construction, as well as the finishes. And that kind of quality, of course, is going to fetch the higher rents. So that's kind of an indirect relationship.
Okay.
So you have your Class A, which is really the cream of the crop, high-end, high amenity type multifamily projects, versus, say, a Class B, which might have been an older building, maybe 80s, 70s, 80s construction, but still a fairly nice building, but not really to the degree and luxury of these Class A's.
Sure.
But to find it more specific than that, I really couldn't do that.
But these agencies are focusing on Class A properties.
Yes, and by that, we're talking newer, higher-end luxury apartments. All four of the buildings that we're acquired in
Is
Glendale.
is
are fairly
there,
recent.
is there any way to encourage them to focus their efforts, as was mentioned by one of my colleagues, on other style or other types of apartment buildings that may increase the affordability by just simply the nature of the building and the age of the building and types of rents that they're currently charging?
That's something that's a conversation we can have with them. Since we became members of Cal CHA and CSCDA, CIA, I should just say those joint powers, we have had meetings with two different groups that like this workforce model, but they want to do, as you're suggesting, they want to target smaller, call them Class B, older, less affluent, less expensive buildings. They want to target those. They don't have the ability to issue bonds to do it, but through other financing mechanisms. So we've had that conversation with smaller entities that want to do something like that. But I could go back to the JPAs.
I think
and ask them.
I think we should approach the JPAs, because certainly some good comments have been made by everyone here. This is a pill that I feel I swallow with a healthy dose of skepticism, including the overuse of the term workforce housing and the referencing of police officers and nurses and teachers and all the people we so enjoy and appreciate the hard work of. We often say that. We'll see how that breaks down in terms of individuals. Of course, I'm sure those are being used as examples, but we're really going to try and make an effort to bring those individuals and those types of workforce individuals into the community. We have to all work at it, let them know about it, and work with different groups that represent them so their members can apply. I don't even want to go into how many of the 1,100 who live and work in Glendale or of the 6,423 applicants are in those categories, right? But there's also this sense, there was a point made by Member Najarian about how this impacts our community, what decisions were made in the past and where we are today. Certainly there's a need for affordable housing. Some of these prices that are quoted that were on the charts are still outside of the realm of affordability for many folks. It's coming close, but it doesn't nearly satisfy or meet all of our goals. And it's also, there's this issue of, there was an article by Paul Krugman in the New York Times a few weeks ago about the gentrification of Blue America and how the types of jobs that are moving in are of a certain income level versus the ones that are leaving. So we have to, as a body, as a region, as a state, get a better understanding, hopefully with the census figures and in tracking the movement of families, individuals, and jobs to see what is happening. Because as Member Najarian said, the purpose of building these buildings in our downtown was to kind of energize and bring in a certain character and feel to the downtown that we don't know if this will necessarily bring in. This is specific to the downtown. Now, of course, there's these projects or these agreements have been struck in other parts of the city, perhaps ones that will help energize those areas. It'll remain to be seen. I do agree with my colleagues that I think at this point it would be good for us to review what future agreements there are, and I would encourage staff to speak to the joint powers to see how we can expand the portfolio of type of buildings or the type of buildings that they're looking at purchasing. Because the other issue is that the people who are building these buildings and then flipping them to this joint authority are not hurting for funds. They're not, this is just, let's call it what it is. The rich gets richer, right? We will get a windfall towards the end, but ultimately, I've advocated for a couple of things, one of which is to see how many of the older apartment buildings in Glendale we can enter into agreements with, perhaps work with other nonprofits, maybe local nonprofits, and help them run it with the understanding that they could run at least parts of the units at a lower AMI level, providing more affordable housing. So with that, I think that there's a general consensus. We would require a motion. Ms. Van Meiden?
I would like to move.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I would like
yes.
to move.
Are there I'm sorry, there must be calls on this item.
Yes, there is one caller.
Oh, okay.
let's go to the caller.
Charlie Kamal. Charlie, you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Charlie Carno from Unite Here Local 11. I just wanted to say, to echo many of the comments made by the council members, but also really support this program. Just from a dollars and cents perspective, you're getting units that the city can then reduce the affordability, make not just moderate but even lower income units in 15 years for something like $20,000 or so a unit, which is just unheard of. Secondly, even if we say, which I think is accurate, that the moderate income units are indeed out of range, and you just look at the very low income units already produced here, that are going to be produced through the program, it's something like $200,000 a unit. 30 million over 140 or so units, and so, I mean, and that's much less than what it costs to build these. So this is a really great program, and just want to congratulate Glendale for moving forward with this, and also support Councilmember Kasakian's comments about looking at how we can also move into Class B buildings. And I would say, think buildings built after 1995. Rent stabilization can not be applied to those buildings in the future if that's something council would consider for younger buildings, older buildings. And reducing even just having a 4% cap on rent increases in those buildings could keep those buildings affordable. In addition to allowing people to live in a relatively new building. I mean, just personally, I've never lived in a building that is that new in my entire life. So, I mean, so this is a great program, and happy to see it be deployed. So, be deployed in Glendale. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to move this item. Before I do that, I want to congratulate those who will be here 30 years later and the public for having $1.170 billion more money than what we have now just by getting these buildings. After 30 million we lose and we get 1.2 billion, will be 1.170 billion. So congratulations to everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Agajanian. Before we move on to this item, Ms. Van Meiden, what is the specific actions that staff and you are requiring from us this evening?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. So at 2A is the council resolution to vest the authority to participate in the workforce housing acquisitions and to grant the approval. And then at 2B is the housing authority's resolution.
So Mr. Agajanian has made that
Yes,
for council, and you wish to make it for housing as well?
Yes, I
Okay.
do for the housing also.
Do we have seconds on those?
Thank
Okay.
you.
With that, let's have roll call for the council.
Councilmember Agajanian,
Yes.
Brotman,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Mayor Devine, and Mayor Pro Tem Kasakian.
Yes, and for housing.
Authority Member Agajanian,
Yes.
Agajanian,
Yes.
Brotman,
Yes.
Devine, Najarian,
Yes.
Farazian,
Yes.
and Chair Kasakian.
I'm sorry, yes. I jumped the gun, Ms. Parazian. I apologize. And if there is no other, and Ms. Parazian was a yes. If there are no other items on this agenda, can I have a motion for adjournment from council
Move to adjourn.
Second.
and for housing authority?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All right. We will stand adjourned, and we will now go to the special meeting of the city council, which we will be calling to order at 2:58 p.m. Thank you, staff. With that, let's have roll call for the city council.
Councilmember Agajanian,
Present.
Brotman,
Here.
Najarian,
Here.
Mayor Devine, Mayor Pro Tem Kasakian.
Here, may we have your report?
The agenda for the Tuesday, September 14, 2021 special public meeting of the City Council was posted on September 7th on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
All right, thank you. And the item before us, if you can please read it into the record.
Community development regarding consideration of a moratorium on new hotels utilizing downtown specific plan incentive system. A, motion to note and file report. B, motion directing staff to study and review the DSP hotel use incentive in 2022. Introduction of interim urgency ordinance prohibiting issuance of entitlements and/or permits for hotel development project in the downtown specific plan, DSP area using hotel use incentives.
Thank you. Mr. Galanian.
Yes. Mayor Pro Tem Kasakian, members of City Council, this item is being presented to you this afternoon in response to Councilmember Brotman's request on the potential for a moratorium on new hotels in the downtown specific plan area. And I'm turning it over to Bradley Calvert, our Assistant Director of Community Development, for the presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and members of the City Council. As mentioned, we're here to discuss the consideration of a moratorium for hotels in the downtown specific plan that are utilizing the hotel use incentive. Part of this conversation was catalyzed during our downtown specific plan update to City Council in 2020. As part of the amendments that were completed with that plan, staff had pledged to come back within a year to kind of provide an overview on the performance of the amendments, if the amendments to the DSP were meeting the council's expectation, the community's expectations. And part of the discussion during that session was the necessity of the hotel use incentive for the DSP. Following a review of a couple of different hotels, as mentioned, council had asked for a report to be brought back regarding whether or not a moratorium would be befitting. So the reason why you see this as a consideration for the downtown specific plan incentive is because of that initial conversation that any potential urgency ordinance that would be adopted for a moratorium would need to tie back to any potential land use changes. Now, as part of that discussion, staff had stated that we would pursue a hotel study. That has not been able to be completed at this time due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As we'll mention today, that's not anticipated to begin until sometime next year, when we believe that business travel will start to return to a normal expectation and normal level. We'll also go over some of the hotels today that have been completed using the downtown specific plan incentive and those that are planned, and then the alternatives for council to consider. So the incentive system, the way this works is any hotel that, or any development that proposes to use the downtown specific plan hotel use incentive is allowed to achieve a higher rate of density or height based on the chart here. Typically that would lead to the maximum height in FAR, that lower, those lower columns of information there. And that is really intended to be the hotel serving as a community benefit. And that has really been defined as a benefit based on its importance to supporting a thriving business district and an urban environment, its benefit to other businesses, the spinoff that comes from those hotels, so increased retail activity, increased restaurant activity in our downtown, all parts of those economic development and planning goals of creating an 18-hour city, particularly in the downtown specific plan study area. But these hotels often also provide amenities to the public, whether those be general meeting rooms or other facilities such as cafes, restaurants, coffee shops, but amenities that do encourage that thriving urban environment, some of those uses that are needed in a downtown neighborhood. And those uses also enhance the pedestrian roam. As one of the projects that will highlight, the Hotel Indigo, will bring some active uses to the street frontage based on the uses that used to be on that site before. Also important for the hotel uses are the TOT, the transient occupancy tax revenue that is generated for the city. This does represent about 3.2% of the total general fund resources. That is based on a 12% tax on each occupied room. For 2021 fiscal year, we are expected to generate a revenue of $8.1 million from the TOT. Much of that also coming from our hotels downtown. Some of the hotels that have been recently completed using the downtown specific plan hotel use incentive, the Hampton Inn, a 315 South Brand that was completed in 2017. The Hyatt Place at 225 West Wilson was completed in 2019. And the Residence Inn completed at 199 North Louise in 2020. That represents a total of 414 rooms that have been brought online since 2017 using the incentive program.
How come, excuse me,
Yes, Mr. Member Agajanian.
how many rooms this Resident Inn have?
Individually, you know, off the top of your
No, because,
total is 414. I do not recall off the top of my head how many in the Residence Inn specifically, though.
okay, all right, thank you.
It's
Yeah,
around 150,
all right,
give or take 10.
Thank you, 150, all right, thank you.
Some other hotels that are approved or are proposed that have some level of improvement include the Hotel Indigo at 515 to 523 North Central. That would be 122 rooms. That is currently in plan check. They have received their stage 2 design review approval. The AC Hotel, most recently, which has been in front of council, 120 West Colorado with 130 rooms. That one is fully entitled with a development agreement. And then there's the Hilton expansion at 100 West Glen Oaks. That's anticipated to be 226 rooms, and that has received a stage 1 design approval. So those are all the projects that are pending that have received some level of approval from the city. This is actually a rendering of the Hotel Indigo, the one on Central Avenue, that was last year approved via Design Review Board Stage 2. They are currently in plan check. This was the first project actually that came from the revised and amended downtown specific plan, really with the goal of creating improved design, improved public open space, improved use of materials. So you can see an activated street level there. There's a plaza in the center of the building, fully exposed to the sky. Those were all results of the changes that were made to the downtown specific plan. You can see an active use there anchoring the corner, likely to be a restaurant or cafe of some sort. This was approved by council unanimously at stage 2 design review, really meeting the goals and intents of what that amended downtown specific plan was intended to do. But those hotels have also come with concerns. And as we highlighted during that 2020 session with City Council and the revisit of the downtown specific plan, particularly raising the question, is the hotel use incentive for the DSP still needed? This has been based on potential traffic that's been created, resource impacts, resources that are being used, water, power, police, fire services, and then the ability of those sites to carry a capacity of housing. That has been a comment that we have heard from the public as well. So alternatives for the council to consider today, note and file and decline to introduce an interim ordinance that would place a moratorium on hotel uses in the downtown specific plan using the downtown specific plan hotel use incentive, and wait to engage in the hotel study that's anticipated to be conducted in 2022. Alternative number 2 is to introduce the interim urgency ordinance imposing a moratorium on hotel developments that utilize the hotel use incentive, but exempting those developments that have received at least a stage 1 design review approval. We use that as a starting point to consider pipeline projects, but obviously open for discussion with City Council. And number 3 is the council may consider any other alternative not proposed by staff. And that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Do any of my colleagues have questions that they'd like to direct to staff?
I have a question, Mr.
Member Najarian.
Mayor Pro. Question is for Bradley. Bradley, does every hotel development that uses the incentives need a development agreement with the city?
They do not always require development agreements, but they do have a covenant for that use for life.
They don't always. So what is the scenario that a hotel would have a development agreement? What would be the cause for that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Najarian, Jillian Van Meiden. So pursuant to Chapter 7 of the DSP, it's either a instrument imposing the covenants or a development agreement. And that development agreement will typically include the covenants that Bradley just described. The difference being that if they want to lock in the zoning for a period of time to create certainty, they would ask for that statutory development agreement, which offers them the opportunity to freeze it. So for example, if they have a large multi-phase project, there's some delay due to construction concerns or other concerns, they have that certainty in order to obtain the financing, for example, in order to complete that project as originally budgeted. So that would be one of the reasons why they would choose the development agreement, is to lock in those entitlements, the zoning, and the general plan. What wouldn't be locked in would be uniform codes and things of this nature that are applicable across the state.
At what point does action by the city council become a taking of vested rights in projects that are in the pipeline? At various, is there a bright line where council can go too far in limiting a project, or not?
Well, you're really asking a vested rights question. And so either there's a contractual vested right pursuant to a development agreement, or a vesting tentative map would be another means by which a project could vest its rights to entitle under certain zoning and general plan regimen. Or there's the traditional method of vesting rights, which is commonly called the Avco Rule, which is in reference to a legal decision. And that is where the developer has a validly issued building permit, is detrimentally relying on that permit by investing a substantial amount of money in reliance on that permit. And it's generally speaking, and that's why I'm saying it's not a bright line rule, it's generally in the neighborhood of around 20% of that permit valuation that they would have had to have invested. So they've excavated, for example. They have installed soldier piles and other forms of reinforcement. They've expended a significant sum of money in reliance. So that would be another way. And of course, that's factually dependent on each of the developments.
How about a design stage 1 approval?
That is not a building permit. Until they have obtained a validly issued building permit and expended that sum of money in reliance on that building permit, they do not vest.
So if I could, I think the answer to your question, legal question, is until one of those things happens where they become vested, there is no taking. They may have spent several $1 million to get to, like the Project Indigo we indicated is in plan check. They may have spent several $1 million to get to that point. But if the rules change, it's kind of the risk of real estate development. You wouldn't have a taking. Now, on the flip side of that, that's just a policy question of the council and how you want to treat development as it comes forward.
And Mr. Najarian and members of the City Council, it's a little more nuanced than that in terms of whether an actual taking has occurred. Would that developer, for example, have been deprived of all economically viable use of the property? There are a number of tests that would need to be, or hurdles that would need to have been overcome in order to establish whether a physical regulatory taking has taken place.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
All right, Member Rotman?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for this report. So as far as if we just get down to the projects that are in the pipeline right now, we have one project, the AC Hotel, which has a development agreement in place, right? So that would be considered having rights vested already, right? That would be a pretty clear-cut case?
Yes.
Okay. The Indigo sounds like they've already gone through stage 1 and stage 2. They're already in plan check. That seems like a gray area.
No, not until they have not until they have a validly issued building permit. They have a vesting tentative map, a development agreement with the city, or they have that validly issued building permit. It's not day 1 of that permit, is they have relied on it in a substantial way. Usually that's, again, the 20% investment under that permit to create a vested right, and it's factually dependent on that project.
And I would just, Ms. Van Buyden and I have been doing this for years, so she'll give the legal answer. From a development perspective, a policy perspective, it's up to the council to decide at what point are you going to say, I'm changing the rules because you haven't spent this amount of money, or you have spent this amount of money.
Right.
They're in plan check. They're pretty far along. You are entitled to change it, but the policy question is, do you want to at that point?
Yeah, that's where I was going. So we could draw a line if we wanted and say that any projects that have gone through stage 1 and stage 2 would kind of be able to go forward under the existing rules. I guess we could say a project that's gone through stage 1 could also, but we could draw a line there if we wanted. If we wanted to say, stage 1, nah, not really. Stage 2, yes. We have all that authority to do that. We wouldn't be subject to any kind of legal challenge.
Those are entirely policy decisions, as Mr. Lanzafame indicated.
Okay. The other question I have is on this issue of whether this is a moratorium on the incentive or is a moratorium period during that time until we complete the hotel study and go back and look at what our policy is going to be. I know that I think in the report, I didn't write down exactly how it was described, but it was, the moratorium has to tie to the land use changes that we're considering, right? But, I mean, it's up to council what land use changes we want to make. I mean, we could go beyond just removing the incentive. We could do any number of things. I know what we discussed was the incentive, but does that really preclude us from considering a moratorium similar to what we did, I know, a few years ago? I think it was Councilmember Najarian who requested the moratorium on residential development in the downtown. Couldn't we take that same approach and just say, let's hold off, other than the projects that we're going to say are already pretty far along? Couldn't we just hold off until we complete the study, we understand what the supply and demand situation looks like, and then we will decide how we want to approach hotel development in general?
That's one of the options that's presented for the council. Unless Ms. Nukian, who worked diligently on this report, can add additional insights and information for the council.
Thank you, Ms. Van Meiden. Members of City Council and Councilmember Brotman, the way that this item was brought forward and noticed, it was a proposed consideration of a moratorium on the incentive. It was not a consideration of moratorium on hotel development, period, in the DSP. And the reason was that community development's understanding was that the council wanted to study the incentive. If the council wishes to study other land use changes that may either prohibit or conditionally permit or change design standards for hotels in general, that's certainly something you can consider. Statutorily, you can enact a moratorium if you're considering land use changes such as that for all hotels, but we would recommend that this be renoticed and brought back as a different report and different ordinance, because the way it's currently brought is a moratorium for hotel incentive in the DSP.
Okay. I mean, when I requested this item, and anyway, I forget who gave me a second, but I think it was you, yeah. What I had in mind was a moratorium. I wasn't thinking of this nuance. And I know that, staff interpreted it a certain way and brought it forward. And so I'll see what my colleagues think. I would prefer to have a straight moratorium. If there isn't a majority of my colleagues that agree, I'm okay with following staff's, well, it's not really a staff recommendation, but following this concept of just a moratorium on the incentive. So I'm open, but just sharing that my preference would be a moratorium just to give us that breathing room until we can decide what it is we really want to do. Okay, thanks.
Member Agajanian.
I would rather see the incentive, moratorium on incentive. If somebody wants to do something without incentive, they are able to do something, good for them. But in the past, I don't know when was this, 2-3 years ago, I was questioning how many hotels this city needs. This became on every street now we have one hotel. Maybe, I do not know, the occupancy, whenever you ask, they come up with numbers. Eventually, you can't figure out where we stand with our hotels. So many hotels are in Glendale that I'm really surprised if they are losing money or they're making money. I know we get 12% tax revenue, but I don't see that they come and start something and they go bankrupt anyway. The other issue I have is at least AC Hotel, we discussed this before, that one has to go, the old building has to go. I cannot say what's happening in there on this open mic, but I know things are not good in that hotel. So if it will be demolished, new building will come there, I will be happy. The prices probably will be higher and things will change in there. But I will wait until my colleagues to discuss the matter further, and then we see where we are going.
Sure. So I think that, what my understanding was that we were looking at a moratorium on proposed hotels in general, because there was a number of proposals that were coming to us at a time where, the average revenue per room for hotels is at an all-time low, and the industry is not projecting those numbers to return to anywhere near the levels they were pre-COVID until 2025. Prior to that, everyone was, marching down the field with this idea that we're going to build hotels because of the Olympics and because this is a great destination place, et cetera, et cetera. Not necessarily views that I share with those optimists, but and based on speaking to people in the hotel industry who were around during the Olympics in the 80s in Los Angeles, I don't necessarily adhere to that field of dreams philosophy of if we build it, they will come. And I think that we all wanted to see us, put on the brakes, figure out what exactly is happening with the hotels before we approve any other proposals, like the one that was, how many rooms was the one right by the freeway off-brand that was being proposed at 1,300 square foot rooms? 800 rooms, an 800 room hotel, higher than 800. I'm getting the signal from the third base coach telling me it was more than 800 rooms. And it was going to potentially, circumvent, I don't know if it was trying to circumvent paying any impact fees or whatever, but at a time when, we seem to have a discussion about the lack of housing in this region and state almost every week, if not every other week. So I appreciate this creative approach that staff may have taken, trying to maybe leave the door open a crack for anything, but I want to see a moratorium on hotels until, and whatever projects have come and have gone there, whatever projects have come before council already and have gone through certain phases of approvals or steps, that's fine. But moving forward, a moratorium on hotels until we can see what's happening in the market, we can see what's happening with the existing hotels before we start wanting to drink the TOT Kool-Aid, the transient occupancy tax Kool-Aid. So that is my position on that. And if that means that staff has to go back and come back to us with a new document, that's what I would put forth. Of course, I wouldn't be able to do that, but it sounds like I have at least one colleague who would. And hopefully someone would second that. Otherwise, I'd pass the gavel. Thank you.
Excuse me, are you saying that these three is, we let them to continue and then moratorium on the whatever comes forward?
Yeah. Yes, that would be my understanding.
Is that
Because
your-
I also wouldn't feel right about pulling the rug out from under individuals and companies that investors, developers, property owners who have come to us and we've had discussions and they've walked away with a certain expectation. But we do know that, in the future, there will be others who want to come and build hotels for a variety of reasons, not the least of which what I mentioned is maybe perhaps to circumvent any impact fees, and then who knows what happens down the road. So with that, we do have callers. I do want to turn to the clerk, Mr. City Clerk. How many callers do we have?
Mayor Pro Tem, we do have 2 callers on the line.
Okay, so with 2 callers, let's give each 3 minutes.
Emad Alayubi. Emad, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'm a resident, Glendale area. I'm a retired NFL player, and I'm in the entertainment business. So I highly in touch in my community. With the hotels that I see already, somebody already was speaking about it. The occupancy does not seem high even before COVID. So we're moving more hotels, more people that are going to come into our neighborhood, our community. Not only that, it sounds like a pipe dream because I lived in Atlanta, and a lot of places around 96 before that, they were building hotels outside of Atlanta to get the people for the Olympics. It didn't happen. It was a pipe dream. People aren't coming from LA to go to Glendale to stay when they want to stay closer to the Olympics. So that's a pipe dream that somebody's just fantasizing about. Secondly, it's going to draw more homeless to our neighborhood, our community, because you're going to get more transit people coming here because there's so much more hotels. And we don't want that in our community. We already have that enough in LA County. In Glendale, we don't have a big homeless population. But when you start throwing more availability into that for them to come, it's going to draw more homeless to our neighborhood. Not only that, it's going to put our police officers on more of a stress because you're getting more people come in. I think before anybody really decides, I think this should be you have to go, yes, stop the moratorium on hotels. Because there should be a lot more research done, because just because they say 12% tax to us in the city, that's only if they're selling out all the units. It's going to really make a big difference. So if they're only selling 20 out of 100, it's not a big difference for us. We're just going to cause more traffic, more congestion, things like that, homeless population. That's how I feel as a resident of Glendale. I don't think we need any more. We have enough that isn't being filled, isn't being taken usage of. And I think the people of Glendale will agree with me on that we do not need more. I think you need to pause it. I know money sounds good when it comes 12% back, but that's only if people are filling them up. And I can probably almost guarantee the last 3 years, since before COVID, half these rooms are being used. And I'll yield the floor.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next caller.
Danielle Wilson. Danielle?
Hi there. This is Danielle Wilson with Unite Here Local 11. I have a couple of folks on the line with me who are going to need translation, and I'm going to go ahead and have them speak first, and then I'll translate for them if that's okay.
Okay, Mr. Clerk, if you could add the time so they can translate and we could comply with the law.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Mr. Clerk. Trini, ¿está en la línea?
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Trini Ramírez. He trabajado en Glendale Hilton durante 22 años como tour down attendant. He vivido en Glendale por 30 años y mi esposo es propietario de una pequeña negocio. Por favor, apruebe una moratoria hotelera para toda la ciudad, para todos los desarrollos hoteleros. En este momento estamos trabajando muy duramente todos los trabajadores para hacer funcionar nuestro hotel, ya que hemos luchado mucho durante el COVID-19. Necesitamos detener el desarrollo hotelero mientras la industria se recupera. Por favor, necesitamos su apoyo.
Muchas gracias, Trini. She said, my name is Trinidad Ramirez. I have worked at the Glendale Hilton for 22 years as a room attendant. I have lived in Glendale for 30 years, and my spouse is a small business owner here in Glendale. Please approve a citywide hotel moratorium. At this time, we are working hard to get our hotel, the Glendale Hilton, up and running as we have been hit hard during COVID-19. We need to stop new hotel development as the industry recovers. Thank you. Okay, Teresa, adelante, por favor. Teresa, ¿está en la línea? Teresa, yo creo que está en mudo en su teléfono.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Teresa Sánchez. He trabajado en el Hilton Glendale por 8 años. He vivido en Glendale durante 30 años. Es muy difícil para nosotros en este momento. Mi familia y yo tenemos problemas. porque el negocio va muy lento, solo trabajo 2 días a la semana. Por favor, pase una moratoria de hoteles para toda la ciudad, mientras nuestros hoteles existentes no son duros o recuperarse. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Teresa. Lo siento. Otra vez, ¿cuántos años trabajaste en el Hilton?
8 años.
8. Gracias. Okay, my name is Teresa. I've worked at the Glendale Hilton for 8 years as a housekeeper. I've lived in Glendale for 30 years. It is very difficult at the moment for me and my family because business is so slow. I only work 2 days a week. Please pass a citywide hotel moratorium as our existing hotels fight hard to recover. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Wilson.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, may
Yes.
I speak now?
Sure.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Danielle Wilson with Unite Here Local 11. Look, this is incredible that you guys are bringing this forward, but to Councilman Agajanian's point, if we really want to enact a moratorium, tying it to the hotel incentive program is literally useless. We want to study hotel demand, period. We don't want to study small hotel demand, you know, in the case of developers who don't utilize the incentive program. Let's do a moratorium that actually has meaning. Let's do it now. Let's not cut deals for certain projects and create standards that are different than what the state dictates with development agreements and the definitive expectations developers have under development agreement state law. Let's just do a blanket moratorium citywide to all the council members' points to make this meaningful. Please do this now. Thank you.
So, thank you to the caller.
Councilmember Najarian speak?
Councilmember Najarian, did you have comments? Did you speak yet?
I just have one question.
Sure.
I had some questions on the legal
You did
technicalities, but let me ask planning staff, if I may. How likely is it for a hotel to be planned if it's not going to be able to receive those incentives? Is it still possible to put one through, or are they highly reliant on those incentives that are currently existing?
Mr. Najarian, I would say that most are highly reliant on those incentives. I will also say that we have some indication that there is a hotel developer that could build without the incentives. That's pretty limited situation where there's unique financing, whether they can finance it themselves, and so they really don't have a financing cost, or it's in an area where height isn't necessarily an issue, but they're very limited. But I believe there are some occasions where that might happen. But for the most part, they need the incentive to make that happen, or some city assistance. In 2018, the city council asked us to do the study that we wanted to update. At that time, the indication was if we had the hotels, those 5 that we've referenced, built, that we would have satisfied our need. This is all pre-COVID, but satisfied the need in that business select service category. It also found, though, that we were lacking in high-end 4- and 5-star hotel and extended stay. Our zoning code prohibits kitchenettes in hotel rooms for some of the reasons that were enumerated or by the callers. So extended stay really isn't an option. So that kind of gives you an idea of where. It also said that those hotels, luxury hotels, probably wouldn't happen without the incentive of the city.
So let me get this straight as to where we are now. Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and Mr. Brotman, you're proposing having staff come back with a properly agendized total moratorium without necessarily dealing with only the incentive issue. Is that correct? Is that what the motion was?
If I could. Yeah, that is what I was thinking. How long would it take for staff to come back with that?
Before we go into that, Councilmember Brotman and members of the City Council, I just want to point out that you cannot just do a moratorium on a use unless you are simultaneously studying the use. For example, for hotels, eliminating the use entirely. We would need to know, or revising the standards, or making it a conditional use, anything like that, revising the zoning standards, the general plan, specific plan, something like that. You would need to be studying an aspect of that. The whole purpose behind, legally, behind why the government code gives cities the ability to do a moratorium is to prevent a rush to the planning counter while something is being studied. So it cannot just happen in a vacuum. It has to be in conjunction with something that the council has wanted to study.
So if we're studying the rate of the hotel industry and hospitality industry recovering post-COVID, is that not?
I don't believe
adequate
legally
study?
that would be a zoning standard, no. It would have to be something like a design standard, a use standard, something like that where it's tied to the land use. For example, when we did the DSP moratorium, the reason we were comfortable doing that is because the council was studying design standards in the downtown specific plan and how to, it was a drastic overhaul of that. But here, just studying the economics behind it and the demand for it, we don't think it meets the standard of Government Code 65858, which talks about, while the council is considering or studying or intends to study within a reasonable time, prohibiting uses that may be in conflict with a contemplated general plan, specific plan, or zoning proposal that they are studying. So it has to be tied to some sort of standard in the zoning code, some sort of land use allowance.
But
Member Agajanian, please.
Yeah.
And then I'll.
Eliminating the incentive is no problem, that we are not going to give any incentive based on.
Meaning you could do a moratorium for that, yes.
Yeah, we don't want to offer any incentive for our moratorium, that's okay, right?
Because you're specifically going to be studying the incentive.
Right.
And we have a companion motion with this report, should you choose to introduce the ordinance as written. It would be to study, motion to study the downtown specific plan hotel use incentive.
If I can just clarify a little bit, the incentive was put in place to encourage hotel development. Because we were lacking in rooms, we were losing tourists and business activity to our neighboring cities that had hotels. So the incentive was there to attract. If you wanted to look at the market and say, you know what, I don't need the incentive anymore, that's really the purpose behind this concept here. I would say another would be if you wanted to eliminate the use altogether in the downtown. I would not recommend that, but that could be. Or if you wanted to condition it, perhaps those are things. But to just say, let's stop until we look at that and then go forward, we might, as Ms. Nukian has said, we might run into some issues.
Why would you not recommend eliminating that use completely at this moment?
I think there may be a time where you want to see hotel development begin again. So I wouldn't recommend taking it out altogether. But you could condition it. You could say, you know what, I'm going to take the incentive out because I don't need to encourage you anymore. If you can do it, and I would say that if somebody does it on their own, that is with no incentive or no assistance from the city, there's also going to be that check and balance with the bank. Whoever is financing it, they're going to make sure that there's some pretty solid data behind the need for those additional units.
In recent years, in recent years, do we have any hotel that did not ask for incentive when they did the building? So far?
I believe recently the hotel, it's a Holiday Inn Express on Colorado. They did not ask for that incentive. That's a new hotel. It was not included in our study because it was outside the downtown. but it did not benefit from those incentives. It's a garden-style hotel, so it doesn't need incentives in height and whatnot. But that was maybe, trying to think, the Hampton Inn had the incentive as well. Hilton, the Hyatt.
But others, they ask for the incentive.
The others took advantage of the incentive. The ones that we talked about in the report here is Hyatt, Hampton Inn, Embassy Suites was a redevelopment deal, so it had some incentive built in for that. The Indigo. The Hotel Louise that was recently completed, those all took advantage of the incentive.
Member Brotman?
Yeah,
we cut you off. I apologize.
No, it's okay. Could we not include in what we're studying the possibility of making hotel use in the downtown discretionary? Could we do that where we're not saying it's not an allowed use. We're not saying it's by right. We're saying it's discretionary, and I'm not sure. Can we go there?
Well, I don't know if you can say, I'm going to sit up here and decide whether you can have a hotel or not, but you could make it a conditional use, and then
that's what
you
I'm
could
thinking,
set conditions on that.
Like it would require a conditional use permit. We could do, and if we were studying that, then we could potentially have just a straight moratorium. Is that right?
Yes, so that is tied to a zoning code modification. If you're studying that, then there is a justification to put a pause on all hotel development, and then, it's to avoid people rushing to the counter before this new development standard goes into effect or new zoning code standard goes into effect and try to get their hotels approved immediately. You would just place a pause on all hotel development while you're studying that specific or set of zoning code changes or general plan changes or whatever the case may be.
Well, that would be my recommendation, is that we would do that. That would allow us to study all the issues and look at possible changes that could include just removing the incentive, or they could include requiring a conditional use permit. And then we would put a moratorium. I would draw the line as far as the existing pipeline goes, or anything that comes forward. I would draw the line between stage 1 and stage 2. But I'll leave that, to my colleagues to see whether there's strong opinions one way or the other.
Member Agajanian.
I have one more question. Do we have, staff has any study that during 2028 Olympic Games, how many guests they will come to Glendale? Do we have any idea what will happen in 2028? Because the hotels will be important part of this.
I can't give you a number, and I'm not sure anybody can, because when people start planning this, everybody started planning a hotel for the Olympics before COVID. And now nobody really knows, especially the banks, what impact COVID is going to have. How do the Olympics change? We saw what it looked like in Tokyo during a pandemic. How do the Olympics change? Nobody's really sure. So I don't know that study has been done. The units that we considered in the 2018 study, those were exclusive of the Olympics. They would certainly take advantage. Any rooms that are built now would benefit from the Olympics, but they were not being built specifically for the Olympics in 2028.
All right, Mike, I just want to put a pause on this for 1 minute. We do have one caller, and this will be the last caller we take on this item, because we've had adequate time for anyone who wished to speak on this item to call up until this point. So this will be the last call we take on this item.
Isabel Valencia, you have 3 minutes. Isabel, go ahead.
Hi, how are you? My name is Isabel, and I have I work in a hotel in Glendale Hilton for 20 years, and I have lived in Glendale for over 30 years. I want to thank the city for coming forward with this hotel moratorium. However, please make sure it applies to all hotels citywide to make it as effective as possible. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. So where are we right now with this? There was a suggestion for a motion by
I can make a
Councilmember Brotman.
motion. Should I make a motion?
Yes, well, one moment, we have our legal counsel.
I apologize
wanting to
for the
make comment. Go
I
ahead.
apologize for the interruption, council members. I just want to clarify if your desire is to bring back an item for a hotel moratorium citywide or just in the DSP, just for staff's benefit.
Citywide, what's the difference?
I hadn't thought about that. I was thinking DSP, but
Hey, we can start with the DSP if that's tied to what the study has to be. I think that's more, I think it would give probably our legal staff a little bit of ease to come up with that. I think the DSP isn't part of the city where we have more control. Am I correct in that, based on council decisions?
Actually, it really would be up to community development, probably to inform council as to what other, if hotel uses have conditional uses outside of the DSP or not. I'm not familiar with that off the top of my head. But either way, it's really up to the council.
If it's the addition of just an extra sentence to give us the option of both when it is brought back, I think that'll give us enough time and my colleagues to mull it over and figure out what the desire is. Certainly, I think you've gotten a sense of what we are looking for versus doing away with simply just incentives. If we can just bring back two options and then we can figure it out then.
I think you're correct in that in the DSP is where you do have the most control. You also have the zoning that's more conducive to hotel use. I mentioned the hotel on Colorado. There was also the Victory Hotel. They actually was too small, and that project is languishing. I don't know citywide of any other proposals. We were really focused on the downtown specific plan. I don't know in 2 weeks that we could probably get a pretty good idea, but I wouldn't have as much detail as what's being proposed in the downtown specific plan.
I would just stick to the downtown specific plan.
Sure,
If it's going to delay us to.
Sure, and I don't, my preference would be just to put a pause on everything altogether, but I think that if we start with the downtown specific plan, it's as good a place to start as any, given council's direct involvement in that part of the city and the plans related to it. Let me ask my colleagues, I know Councilmember Agajanian has a comment. Councilmember Najarian, do you wish to speak after Councilmember Agajanian?
Just briefly, for one sentence, I would support Mr. Brotman's concept of the downtown specific plan.
So that motion does have a second.
Okay.
Councilmember Agajanian.
Excluding these three projects which is in the pipe?
No.
It would exclude the projects that were mentioned in the report, correct?
No, because what I suggested was that we draw the line between stage 1 and stage 2, so that if a project has gone fully through stage 2 and it's in plan check, I would think that's very far along and that should move forward. And I would say the same, obviously, for the one hotel that already has a development agreement. I think those two are so far along. I would personally say if it's only been stage 1, I think that should probably fall under the moratorium. Am I making sense?
May I, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and council members, good afternoon. Since you're going to have to make that decision when we bring back this re-agendized item in a few weeks, my suggestion is just to provide the direction for us to bring it back. We'll bring you those options that would include that, and then you can make the decision, have the discussion, make the decision then. But we'll have it so that it grandfathers in though to have only stage 2, and then we'll give you an option that includes where it grandfathers the ones that have stage 1 or stage 2.
All right.
And then you can make the decision then.
So that is Councilmember Brotman's motion, and Councilmember Najarian, is that a motion that you're seconding?
Yes, I would support
All right.
Brotman.
Thank you. With that, let's have a roll call.
Councilmember Agajanian,
Yes.
Brotman,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Mayor Devine, and Mayor Pro Tem Kasakian.
Yes. All right, with that, let us adjourn this special meeting of the City Council. Do we have a motion to adjourn and a second?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone who called in. Let's move on to the City Council agenda. I'd like to open the City Council meeting at 3:49. May we please have roll call?
Councilmember Agajanian,
Present.
Brotman,
Here.
Najarian,
Here.
Mayor Devine, and Mayor Pro Tem Kasakian.
Here. What are the items before us?
One would be closed session, 1A conference with real property negotiators, property location 216 North Brand Boulevard and 116 West California Avenue. Negotiating parties, Glendale Arts, SAS Entertainment, and General Admission. Agency negotiators attending the closed session are Rubik Olanian, Michael J. Garcia, Jillian Van Meiden, Philip Lanzafame, Michelle Flynn, and Bradley Calvert. Instructions to the negotiators will concern the price and terms for the lease of property. B would be conference with labor negotiators. The city designated negotiators attending closed session are Rubik Olanian, Michael J. Garcia, Jillian Van Meiden, Matt Doyle, John Tuktayan, Amy Martin, Silvio Lanzas, and Michelle Flynn. The names of the employee organizations are Glendale Management Association, Glendale City Employee Association, Glendale Police Association, Glendale Fire Association, and IBEW Local 18, Unit 40. C would be conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure litigation pursuant to the paragraph subdivision D2 and E1 of the section 54956.9, one potential case. D, conference with legal counsel, pending litigation, City of Glendale versus Camp Rose, LASC case number 19ST-CV37455.
Those are it?
That's it.
Thank you. Do we anticipate reporting out on any of these items?
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, no, we do not.
All right. With that, we'll recess to closed session.